The rain hadn't stopped for hours. Gray sheets blurred the windows of the SUV as Alexander Reynolds pushed his son's wheelchair across the parking lot of Oakwood Animal Shelter. The scent of bleach and damp fur greeted them like a wall. Dogs barked from behind wire crates, frantic, hungry for attention. But Mason didn't flinch. He hadn't flinched at anything in nearly a year. 11 months ago, Mason had been an ordinary 8-year-old with scraped knees and a love for tree climbing. But now he sat motionless, paralyzed, from the waist down, and voiceless since the accident that took his mother. His eyes didn't track the movement of the dogs. His fingers simply twitched patterns into the padded armrest of his chair. Alexander felt the familiar ache of helplessness claw at him. Mr. Reynolds' Ellie Winters appeared in the hallway like a splash of warmth. Blonde ponytail, kind eyes, shelter badge, clipped to her faded jeans. We spoke on the phone. I'm Ellie. Alexander nodded, tight-lipped. Dr. Mitchell said animal therapy might help. She crouched beside Mason but got no reaction. We have some sweet dogs, she whispered. Would you like to meet them? The tour was brief, sterile. Ellie pointed out a calm lab mix, a golden retriever with therapy certification, even a gentle beagle. None of them earned a glance from Mason. Alexander checked his watch, silently calculating the acceptable amount of time before leaving. Then Ellie stopped in front of the last kennel. This is Shadow, she said hesitantly. Unlike the others, the German Shepherd didn't bark. He stayed curled in the shadows, amber eyes wary. A jagged scar crossed his muzzle. His right ear was nicked. He looked like a soldier who'd seen too many wars. He's been returned 7 times, Ellie said. Not because he's bad, because no one could understand him. Alexander frowned. He doesn't seem therapeutic, but something shifted. Mason raised his head slowly and stared directly at the dog. For the first time in 11 months, his gaze connected with something. Shadow's ears lifted. He stood, took a step forward. Ellie's voice caught. He never does that. Mason raised his hand to the chain link. Shadow approached, slow but steady, and pressed his muzzle to the boy's trembling fingers. The room they moved to was quiet and dim, just a frayed sofa, a few scattered chew toys, and a faint smell of cedar cleaner. Ellie led Shadow in on a short leash, her movements slow, careful. She glanced at Mason and whispered, "Just sit still. Let him choose." Shadow didn't lunge or sniff around wildly. Instead, he paced the perimeter, once measured, thoughtful, before approaching the boy's wheelchair. His ears tilted forward. He stopped just inches from Mason's knees, waiting. Not demanding, not uncertain, just listening. Mason's hand lifted again this time, with no fence between them. The boy's fingers brushed the fur at Shadow's neck, coarse, damp, real. Shadow leaned in gently, resting his scarred muzzle in Mason's palm, as if surrendering something fragile. A sound barely louder than a breath escaped Mason's lips. Dog. Alexander's head jerked up. He wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. His brain struggled to register it. One word. One word after nearly a year of silence. Ellie gasped, covering her mouth. Did he just... Alexander couldn't speak, could only nod, eyes burning. Mason whispered again, clearer this time. Shadow. The dog responded with a soft whine and pressed closer. Mason's fingers knotted in his fur, like someone clinging to a lifeline. Alexander's composure, built from months of cold control, cracked in that moment. "We'll take him," he said, voice husky. Ellie hesitated. "Mr. Reynolds, I appreciate the decision, but Shadow isn't easy. He's been through trauma. He'll need time, patience." "My son just spoke," Alexander said, barely holding back the swell in his throat. "I don't care what he needs. He'll have it." As Ellie retrieved the paperwork, Mason didn't let go of Shadow. The boy's hand rested on the dog's head, like it belonged there. Shadow leaned protectively against the wheelchair, already assuming a role no one had asked of him. No one in that shelter could have known this broken boy and this misunderstood dog had just saved each other. The marble halls of the Reynolds mansion had always echoed, polished, clinical, silent. But now there was sound, soft padding, the click of nails against tile, the occasional bark muffled through corridors. Shadow moved like a sentinel patrolling each room before circling back to Mason, never straying too far. On the first night, Alexander tried coaxing the dog to a luxury bed prepared in the adjoining room. Shadow didn't budge. He lay by Mason's specialized hospital bed head, resting on his paws, amber eyes glinting with purpose. "Let him stay," Mason whispered. It was the 7th word since Shadow came home. Alexander stared, then nodded. Rules seemed absurd now. By week's end, Mason had spoken 23 words, all related to Shadow. His voice was shaky, often soft, but it was his. Words like water shadow, come and good boy echoed down the same sterile halls that once only knew silence and sorrow. Alexander documented each utterance in his leather-bound journal, not as a father, but as a man clinging to proof that healing was real. Dr. Mitchell came for a visit and watched Mason stroke Shadow's fur in the garden. "This is promising," she said carefully. "But don't expect miracles. Animal bonds can fade." Alexander didn't reply. He watched his son toss a rubber ball that barely rolled a foot, watched Shadow nudge it back with infinite patience. This wasn't a miracle. It was something quieter, something earned. Then one night at 3:17 a.m., Shadow barked. Loud, urgent. Alexander opened the bedroom door in irritation, but the dog darted down the hall toward Mason's room. Shadow whined, then leapt beside Mason's bed, his body trembling, tail stiff. Something was wrong. Mason's body jerked once, then again. A seizure. Alexander sprang into action. Recovery position, emergency medication, intercom for the night nurse. Shadow stayed beside the bed, pressed close, his whine turning into a protective growl at the air. Afterward, the nurse stared wide-eyed. "How did you know?" "I didn't," Alexander said. He did. Tests confirmed what Alexander had witnessed. Shadow could detect Mason's seizures before they began, 15 minutes, give or take. No training, no commands, just instinct, just devotion. Dr. Mitchell was astounded. Some dogs are bred and trained for this. But this. She shook her head slowly. This is rare. This is intuitive. Shadow's presence brought order to chaos. The staff adapted quickly, learning to recognize his cues, pacing, pawing, low whines. A trainer was hired to refine his alerts. 2 sharp taps of the paw now meant an impending seizure. It gave Mason time to medicate, time to prepare. But Shadow didn't just watch over Mason's body. He became a guardian of his will. With Shadow beside him, Mason participated more actively in therapy. He spoke to nurses, gave short commands, even joined Alexander for dinner again, first at the threshold, then at the table. The dog had become his anchor. "He serves me every day," Mason told his father one evening, as Shadow gently retrieved the boy's pajamas from the dresser, a task designed to improve Mason's speech and mobility. Alexander blinked, struck by the quiet clarity of the statement. It was true. Shadow didn't obey. He served. And the mansion changed. Not just the boy, not just the father, but the air, the rhythm, the meaning of home. Staff who once moved like ghosts now paused to pet the dog. The corners where grief had pooled were slowly swept clear by the simple weight of paws, breath, and fur. Yet Alexander watched, with both wonder and fear. Love had entered his home again, and with it, the possibility of loss. Then came a knock at the door. Rain slicked the stone steps. A man in his 50s stood dripping on the threshold, boots worn, jacket frayed, eyes hard. "I'm Jeffrey Williams," he said flatly. "You have my dog." Alexander stiffened. "You're mistaken. We adopted Shadow legally." "He's not Shadow," the man snapped. "His name is Max. He was stolen, and he's mine." Alexander's instinct for negotiation kicked in, posture shifting to that of a CEO in battle. "Take it up with the shelter," he said coldly. "We have paperwork." Jeffrey didn't flinch. "He's trained medical alert. I paid 20 grand for it. He was for my daughter Lily. Diabetic." As the words settled, Shadow appeared at Mason's side in the hallway. The dog froze at the sight of Jeffrey. His stance shifted, not aggressive, not submissive, just still. Calculating, remembering. "Max," Jeffrey breathed. "Hey boy, remember me." But Shadow didn't move. He stayed at Mason's side, pressed close. His gaze darted between the stranger and the boy. "He doesn't seem eager to reunite," Alexander remarked. Jeffrey's jaw tightened. He explained that his ex-wife had taken the dog in their separation. Later, she surrendered him when her new apartment banned large breeds. By the time he found out, the dog had already passed through several hands. Alexander listened, but he was watching Mason. The boy had inched backward in his wheelchair. One hand clutched Shadow's fur. "Dad," he whispered. "Please don't let him take Shadow." It was the first time Mason had called him Dad since the accident. Alexander turned slowly toward the man. "Mr. Williams, I'll verify your claims. But until then, Shadow stays where he is supporting my son." Jeffrey's mouth opened in protest. "I have lawyers," Alexander cut in. "Very good ones." Later, Alexander called both the shelter and his head of security. He needed answers, and fast, because behind Jeffrey's claim was a history, one that might unravel everything. The next morning, Ellie Winters arrived at the mansion carrying a thick folder. Her usual cheer was replaced by quiet tension. She looked out the window where Mason sat in the garden shadow, ever watchful, and sighed. "I didn't know," she began. "About Shadow's past as a service dog, I swear." Alexander nodded. "I believe you. But now I need the truth." Ellie opened the folder. "Shadow's been surrendered 7 times in 3 years. Each time with a different name. Max, Duke, Rex, Bandit, Storm." She paused. "We gave him the name Shadow." Alexander scanned the intake records. Why so many returns? At first it looked like aggression, barking, knocking things over. But when I looked closer, she flipped to highlighted notes. This family said he pushed over their toddler. But later the child was hospitalized for an allergic reaction. Shadow may have sensed it. Another owner said he tore up their kitchen. Turned out there was a gas leak. Alexander leaned in. He wasn't misbehaving. He was alerting. They just didn't understand. Ellie nodded. Exactly. He wasn't dangerous. He was frustrated, misread. Each return chipped away at his ability to trust. Alexander exhaled slowly. And Jeffrey, he wasn't being honest. I traced the microchip to the training organization. Shadow was trained for diabetic alerts. Yes. But I also spoke with Jeffrey's ex-wife. Her voice dropped. She says he sold the dog to cover gambling debts, then lied when their daughter got sick without him. She's gathering evidence for custody modification, Ellie added. Said finding Shadow gave her hope. Alexander stared out the window at his son, no longer silent, no longer unreachable. Shadow was curled at his feet. I'm not giving him back, Alexander said softly. Mr. Reynolds, I'm not saying we steal someone's service animal. I'm saying we need to do what's right for both children and for Shadow. The words were quiet, but final. Dr. Lauren Pierce arrived 2 days later. The country's foremost animal behaviorist, she was elegant, clinical, and not easily impressed. She spent the first hour simply observing Shadow's every move, every glance, every breath around Mason. Finally, she spoke. He's extraordinary. Shadow displays all the markers of formal service dog training. But there's more. This Bond. She gestured to the boy, and the dog napping under a patch of filtered sunlight. This is chosen. He's not just serving Mason. He's devoted. What about the aggression claims? Alexander asked. Misinterpretations, she replied. Shadow isn't violent. He's trying to communicate with humans who weren't listening, and now he is listening to your son. Constantly. Dr. Pierce recommended formal seizure alert certification. Alexander agreed. His foundation funded a full-time trainer. Shadow's alert behaviors became precise. 2 soft taps meant a seizure was near. The staff adjusted medication accordingly. Mason's seizures dropped. His therapy improved. He laughed. He wanted to go back to school, but the outside world wasn't as receptive. First came the whispers, then the protests. Outside Connecticut Children's Hospital, a small group held signs. Dangerous dogs don't belong with children. Aggressive breed. Aggressive behavior. Shadow didn't growl. He simply stood beside Mason, still steady, protective. Mason's voice cracked with confusion. But Shadow's not dangerous. He's my friend. The media caught hold. Victoria Chambers, board member and vocal critic, gave a scathing interview. Billionaire puts paralyzed child at risk with attack dog. Stock photos of snarling German shepherds flooded the headlines. Shadow's scarred face became a symbol, not of resilience, but fear. Alexander said nothing publicly, but privately he launched a campaign videos of Shadow's gentle alerts testimonials, from Mason's doctor's footage of a boy rediscovering life with the help of a dog everyone else had given up on. The tide turned slowly. Families with service animals began sharing their stories, how misunderstood dogs had saved lives, how scars didn't always mean violence. Dr. Pierce appeared on news segments, calmly explaining the science of animal behavior, the difference between protection and aggression. The hospital released a statement praising Shadow's impact on Mason's treatment. Pediatric neurologists expressed interest in the case study Dr. Mitchell had submitted. And Shadow. He simply continued doing what he always had, watching, listening, loving. But not everyone was convinced. Your board is restless, Robert Thompson warned one afternoon, sipping bourbon in Alexander's study. Victoria Chambers is questioning your leadership. The optics, an aggressive dog, a vulnerable child. It's not good business. She's using my son to gain control, Alexander replied. This isn't about safety. It's about leverage. She chairs the Pet Safety Council, Robert said. She's planning to make your decision a national case study in irresponsible adoption. Alexander stood pacing toward the window. Outside, Mason and Shadow played a slow game of fetch. The boys' laughter carried faintly on the wind. Let her try, Alexander muttered. Some things matter more than board votes. Still, the pressure mounted. Protesters appeared again at the gates at Mason's school evaluation meeting. And when Alexander escorted his son to a routine hospital checkup, a photographer captured Shadow's scar in the wrong light. The image went viral. Billionaire endangers son with killer dog. The headline made Alexander's blood boil. He didn't respond with rage. He responded with facts. A full release of Shadow's medical detection logs, video footage of seizure prevention, a PR video of Mason whispering, "He saved me." And slowly the world began to listen, not to headlines, but to a child who had once been silent. With the noise of the outside world muffled by trust, the Reynolds household embraced a new rhythm. Each morning began with Shadow, nudging Mason's hand, rousing him gently. Therapy followed now, with purpose, now, with laughter. Shadow stayed by Mason's side through every stretch, every stammered sentence, every stumble forward. The dog didn't just anticipate seizures. He anticipated emotion. When Mason grew frustrated, Shadow would place a paw gently in the boy's lap. When he laughed, Shadow wagged once, then rested his chin on Mason's thigh, as if absorbing the joy. Under guidance from the trainer, Shadow learned new tasks, fetching medication, opening doors, even pressing medical alert buttons when Mason's hands were weak. But the dog's greatest gift remained his timing. 17 minutes before every episode, he warned them. Always 17. The precision startled even Dr. Mitchell. "We're not just reacting anymore," she said. "With this predictability, we can adjust medication to prevent the seizures entirely." And they did. The results were stunning. Seizure frequency dropped by 80%. Mason's energy returned. He began using full sentences, volunteering answers in therapy, even requesting to eat meals with his father. Alexander no longer documented progress in clinical notes. He lived it. He played board games in Mason's room. He read aloud while Shadow dozed at their feet. He listened. One night after a quiet game of cards, Mason looked up. "Do you think Mom would have liked Shadow?" The question hit like a wave. They rarely spoke of Catherine. Grief made her untouchable. Alexander's voice caught, then steadied. "Yes," he said. "She would have loved him. She always wanted a dog." "She did," Alexander whispered. "She said every boy should have one." He didn't say what he thought next. "I should have listened sooner." That night, as spring rain tapped softly on the windows, Alexander revised his will. He officially named Shadow as Mason's service animal and established a lifelong trust for the dog's care. It was a legal step, but also a vow. A recognition of what Shadow had become, not a pet, but family. The following weeks brought a new kind of stillness, not silent like before, but peaceful. Mason asked to return to school, his confidence buoyed by Shadow's steady presence. "He already is my service dog," Mason said, when his father hesitated. "He serves me every day." Alexander didn't argue. Instead, he prepared the necessary documentation, determined to shield his son's progress from bureaucratic hesitation. For once, it wasn't about legal compliance. It was about honoring what had already been earned through loyalty and instinct. Then came the pattern. During a routine review, Dr. Mitchell noticed it. Every seizure alert from Shadow came precisely 17 minutes before onset. No variation. "With timing this exact," she explained, "we can completely recalibrate Mason's medication." They did. And the transformation was dramatic. Energy replaced exhaustion. Hope replaced survival. Mason's personality, once buried under trauma and silence, bloomed. And Shadow, always watchful, remained at his side like a lighthouse in the fog. Part 6A Trial by Fire. The storm hit on a Tuesday night. Warnings had been issued for days, but no one expected the scale. Winds screamed down from the coast. Rain battered the mansion's windows. Alexander delayed by a tense board meeting, with Victoria Chambers prepared to leave as road closures began. "Call the house," he instructed. "Tell them I'm on my way." No signal. Back at the mansion, Mason was in bed. Shadow lay curled at his side. Mrs. Bentley had suggested moving downstairs for safety, but Mason had refused. "Shadow will alert me," he said. At 8:47 p.m., the backup generator failed. Darkness fell like a shroud. Shadow stirred first, ears twitching, nose in the air. Then a low growl, not of threat, but alarm. Smoke slipped in under the door like a whispered warning. Mason reached for his emergency button, dead without power. His phone, no signal. The room was filling with haze. Shadow barked, then darted to the door, scratching, whining. He tugged at Mason's sleeve, trying to pull him, forgetting for a moment that the boy couldn't move on his own. "I can't get to the chair," Mason cried. "You have to find someone." Shadow hesitated, torn. He had never left the boy's side, not once. Then Mason whispered through tears, Go. Shadow touched his muzzle gently to Mason's cheek, then vanished into smoke. Downstairs, Mrs. Bentley had found the security guard collapsed from smoke inhalation. She was stranded, no way to climb back to Mason until Shadow found her. He barked, tugged at her sweater, turned toward the front entrance. Upstairs, she asked. He ran to the front door. Outside, rain lashed the earth. Shadow wait. But the German shepherd bolted into the storm pause, slapping wet stone, vanishing into darkness. She followed. 50 yards down the drive, headlights cut through the gloom. An SUV pulled in fast, Alexander behind the wheel. The moment he opened the door, Shadow launched himself at him, barking, spinning, soaked and wild. Alexander didn't ask. He ran. Inside, smoke thickened by the second. Mason lay, coughing, eyes stinging, the emergency whistle Shadow had given him, still clutched in his hand. And then a shape in the doorway. A rush of wind. His father. Strong arms lifted him from the bed, wrapping him in the blanket Shadow had pawed from the drawer. The three escaped through the side terrace just before flames engulfed the east wing. Outside, Mason clung to his father. Shadow stood beside them, soot-streaked, limping but upright, eyes never leaving the boy. "He saved me," Mason whispered. Alexander nodded, voice breaking. "He saved us both." And as the storm passed and sirens pierced the night, one scarred dog lay down beside his boy, not as a hero seeking praise, but as a guardian who finally had a home forever.